Hi, this is Tony Guthrie, and I welcome you to this video today. And today we're going to start the very first process of the homiletical bridge, explaining just how this thing works and why it's beneficial to you in your sermon preparation process, and really making good connection to the modern day listener. Just the process of expository preaching, and what we need to do to make sure that we really understand a passage of Scripture and then make good, solid application to our people. And if you have a copy of the book, Crossing the Homiletical Bridge, then you should be reading through this. And the very first thing that we talk about in the homiletical bridge is what we call the context. The book context, the prior context, and the immediate context. And a lot of my students oftentimes wonder why in the world that we have to spend so much time about this thing called context and book context and all of this. Well, it's very simple. You know, they don't like the work that's involved in discovering the answers or what it takes to know what the context of a passage is, but it really isn't that complicated. You know, the idea of the context is simply trying to discover how everything weaves together. Everything that Paul says in Philippians, everything connects to one or the other. One thing connects to another, one thing is related to another. So if you understand context, then you understand how it's really a lot easier how to understand what the entire passage means. One of the most misquoted verses in all the Bible is Philippians 4:13 about I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And as though it's some kind of a Zig Ziglar motivational quote, but it's totally taken out of its context, which means that I can do all things as it relates to continuing and doing in the ministry, no matter what circumstance I might find myself in. And Paul was talking to the people about continuing on in ministry and being united together and so forth. It has nothing to do with having your personal dreams and ambitions, but it has to do with being able to continue on in ministry regardless of what life throws our way. And this is what context does for us. It helps us to understand how everything weaves together and why someone said a certain thing at a certain time in the context of a particular passage or pericope. And I tell my students all the time, if I were to give you this example, if I were to come into the classroom and say to you, look, next week I'm going to be in Austin, Texas. I'm going to go over there just to spend some time to myself. I've got some articles I want to write. I just need to be alone for a while. I don't want any phone calls. I don't want any emails. I just want to get over there and do some writing and some processing of some information so that I can be a better professor. And then I send you a postcard during that week that I'm over there. And the postcard says to you, hey, I'm having a great time. I'm glad you are not here. Well, you won't take that as something that's insulting to you. You'll say, well, you understand the context. You know why I went to Austin. You know what I was wanting to do there. You know why I didn't want you to be there with me. So this is what context does. It helps us understand how everything relates together. And the first part of context that we want to discover or work on is this idea of what we call book context. What is the context of the entire book? Let's say you've chosen Philippians and you want to know why that book was written and so forth. So you start with just trying to discover why it was written. What was Paul's purpose in writing to the Philippians? I mean, obviously he had heard some things and he wanted to say some things to them. And if you understand why he wrote it, then when you get into the passages itself and you get into the epistle, you can understand why he said certain things, and you can understand how those things relate, and you can understand what it means for the modern audience. You want to know who he was writing to. Who are the intended listeners? And then for modern day application, you want to think in terms of, well, who those people were and what my modern day listener has in common with those people. So I need to know why it was written. I need to know to whom it was written to. I need to know when it was written, because that brings into a lot of things. Geographical considerations are part of it to some degree. But when I'm talking about when, I'm really talking about what political things were going on, what religious things were going on, who was in charge of the Roman Empire, who was overseeing certain aspects of the religious leadership, and so forth. So I need to know when, and I need to know where. I need to know where the people were that were receiving it, and I need to know where the person was that was writing it. And if I know all of these things, then it helps me to understand how it all ties together and weaves together for that particular passage of Scripture, that entire book of the Bible. So I need to know the context as a whole. I need to know the specific book context, why, who, when, and where it was written. And I also need to know the prior context. Let's just say I've selected Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. That's going to be the passage that I'm going to pick on, or preach on, I should say. That I need to know everything that was said in chapter 1 leading up to it. I need to know everything that was said just before my selected passage. this kind of serves as what I call the lead-in. I can't tell you how oftentimes I see students just reach into a Bible, take a passage of Scripture and just pull it out of the Bible, maybe slide their Bible aside and set that down on their computer and say, okay, this is what I'm going to preach on, with no understanding of what was said just before or even the things that was said after, no understanding of the book context and so forth. And then it's going to guarantee that they're going to preach the entire passage away from its original meaning and certainly out of its context. You need to know what was said before, because everything that was said before is a lead-in to what is about to be said. So in Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, I understand Paul's cry to unity. I understand Paul's call to considering others, because everything he said in chapter 1 was he was commending them on what a great job that they were doing together, how the ministry had advanced and they were working together. There wasn't any selfish consideration there. And so he was saying to them, you can make my joy complete by staying together, staying a unified body, and not thinking so much about yourself, but the bigger picture, considering others more highly than you consider yourself. So it was a continuation of everything that he was already saying about commending them for the great job they were doing, and why he wanted them to stay together, and how staying together had caused the gospel of Christ to continue. So there's a message in there when you understand the context. This is Tony Guthrie. Thanks for joining me.